The mission of the Inattentive ADHD Coalition is to ensure that children with inattentive ADHD are diagnosed by the age of 8 and that adults with inattentive ADHD receive prompt and accurate diagnosis when seeking help. To learn more about our mission and how you can help, visit iadhd.org.
We're speaking with Anna Kritsch, a linguist and cartoonist. And you're speaking to us from Germany, but you were born in Croatia?
Yes, that's correct. I was born in Zagreb and lived my first 21 years in Zagreb, and then lived in several places and now in Germany.
Okay.
Moving around a lot.
I've got a lot I want to ask you. First, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Catherine Ellison. I'm a journalist and author of several books about ADHD, including the family memoir, Buzz, You're Paying Attention. We've been interviewing people with inattentive ADHD, and so glad that you reached out. I love your cartoons. There's one that you did recently that said, your New Year's resolution is to do things that make you happy. For some, that might be a controversial resolution because it might seem selfish, but it occurred to me that if you do things that make yourself happy, you're more likely to make other people happy. Was that what you were thinking?
Yes, when it comes to New Year's resolutions, we often think about it in terms of what can I improve, the things I've been doing not so good, the habits I haven't taken up yet, and so on. My idea here was that we do things that make us feel good. Those things should be good in themselves. They shouldn't be harming someone. I said that somewhere in my text that, of course, we're counting that you're a good person. We're counting on that. But then the things that make you happy are actually what will result in you having better habits overall. And that's the only way actually to sustain a good habit, is to actually be happy about the thing you're doing.
Did it take some work for you to figure out the things that make you happy?
That's actually one of my ADHD strengths. I cannot do things that I dislike. The things that I actually feel like doing are usually the things that make me happy. I have a very clear, almost a bodily reaction towards things I dislike. I always know what I dislike. The things that I feel like doing, the things that energize me, are usually the things I really want to do. My major problem is where there are things that I still have to do and I dislike.
It's one of the compensations of growing up, that you have to do fewer of the things that you don't want to do. As a child, it seems the ratio of things that you have to do that you don't want to do is higher.
There's some things when you're a child that you're still learning how the world works. Sometimes in school or parents push you to do things that maybe you're not that inclined to do. When you're an adult, you have more responsibility and you are the person that is accountable to do things. I think it's different things. You might have more of those you dislike even as an adult.
I just think of a child having to sit, at least in our public school system, for 8 hours straight, class after class, which is almost impossible for somebody with ADHD. Do you remember what it was like being a child and having ADHD back then?
Yes, I think my case is very peculiar. I really loved school, especially as a small child. I like is learning new things. I was always very curious as a very young child when you're still learning very basic things like writing and math and basic history. I was always sitting in the first row. That was a part of it. I knew that if I went somewhere in the back of the classroom, I wouldn't pay as much attention. I was always in the first row and I was listening 100% to what the teacher is saying. I learned I didn't have to study at home, except for maybe homework. I was always getting everything from the class itself. I was always an excellent student. I only started noticing the difficulty at learning and studying things I didn't like that much when I got to high school, when things got more complex. It was really hard to sit down. I have the inattentive type, so I'm not hyperactive physically that much. So that in itself wasn't so hard, but I do have some stimming things. I do things with my hands or with my feet. I did notice that, definitely.
When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed 2 years ago. Yeah, so I'm 32. So I was diagnosed at 30.
Okay.
Yeah, which is pretty late. I figured out I have ADHD at the beginning of this social media boom of learning about ADHD. I confirmed my suspicions through social media. I was looking for a diagnosis that would explain things I was struggling with for a very long time. I just never really thought ADHD could be part of that because I had this stereotype in my mind that it's about being physically hyperactive.
What it was that made you really curious on social media, How did it present in a way that made you change your idea of it?
Today I was looking through my YouTube history to find out the video that really put me on this spree of binge watching a lot of stuff on ADHD. This was from the channel How to ADHD, where a lot of different topics about ADHD are explored. This particular video was talking about how ADHD people often hold themselves accountable to neurotypical standards, and how we often fail because we cannot compete on the same level. We cannot maybe keep a job for a very long time. We keep having new ideas, new interests, but at the same time, many of those things are our strengths. Sometimes we should pay attention to the things that we're good at, like being creative. Everything resonated with me in that video. I even left a comment, oh my God, this is me completely. From then on, everything else I saw really resonated with me. Eventually, I went to get an official diagnosis and I got a confirmation from a psychiatrist.
Before I ask you about the difficulties you've had, what about those strengths? How has ADHD been a strength for you?
Knowing what I want is a very strong one. For example, when I got to high school, I clearly knew which subjects I really love and I invested all my energy into, and which subjects I will do the minimum to get by and be satisfied with a lower grade, but still a good one. I always knew what I wanted. Being creative, I think, is the second most important strength. I'm very creative. This is also a curse and a blessing because I'm so creative. Sometimes I can't not be. When I have to just listen to rules and follow instructions, it's hard because I want to create new things.
Some of us get too anxious to allow ourselves to be creative, but it sounds like in your career, you've managed to go ahead and follow your instincts.
I always chose careers where I can do that to some extent. I ended up in science, so I also did a PhD and I did research because I felt like this was a way to have a secure job. Going for research gave me a more secure position at the university to get more funding, but still you have this creativity that you can explore and create new things, propose new theories, discuss things. I looked for that way to be able to do that.
Can you tell me what you're doing now as a linguist? It sounds like you're doing some really interesting research.
My PhD was pure linguistics. I studied an indigenous language from Vanuatu in South Pacific. Now I shifted because obviously I'm always looking for new topics. I cannot stand in one particular area. Now I'm applying linguistics to comics. In the current project, I'm working at the Tilburg University in the Netherlands, and we look for connections between the structure or grammar of languages and how is that similar to structures of comics. For instance, manga in Japan is different from comics in France and Belgium. I also have my own interest in comics as a creator.
Let me go back to your diagnosis for a second. What country were you living in when you were diagnosed?
In Germany.
Who diagnosed you when you finally got that diagnosis?
It was a psychiatrist, and I was actually very lucky. I was living in Düsseldorf, which is a slightly smaller city, and I found a psychiatrist who specializes in ADHD and depression. Once I got the appointment, it was a quite quick process. We had a talk. I explained my history and past experiences in therapy. We also did a questionnaire regarding my current symptoms. I got a confirmation that it's ADHD. I know that in some countries it's a much more complex, and
I've heard, and this might be from years past, that there was quite a lot of stigma against ADHD in Europe, perhaps more than in the United States. Did you feel much stigma?
Definitely growing up in Croatia, I think there's more stigma in Croatia. Unfortunately, mental illness or anything related to mental issues is like being crazy. I grew up in the 90s when people generally didn't think well of such things. And if someone had ADHD or if a child was diagnosed, it was really the most extreme cases, even among boys. Something like inattentive ADHD would never be diagnosed. There is definitely that stigma. Most of my family members have ADHD and none of them were diagnosed. And many of them, the older generation, they're not even planning to get a diagnosis.
How did your family react? Were they supportive?
Yeah, so supportive, but also a little bit, no, I wouldn't say negating it, but saying, it's okay. Well, everyone has it. We will have that. It doesn't matter if it's called something or not. They're not big with labels. And I think, they still want to say, okay, everyone struggles with something. And I'm like, yes, people struggle with stuff, but I like to know what I struggle with specifically.
It's hard to If you're high functioning, in my own family, people would say to me, you can't possibly have ADHD because look at all you're doing. Don't look at the struggles that's beneath that. But had you had therapy before you saw the psychiatrist for your diagnosis?
Yes, I did. Yes, like 5 years ago, I had a therapist, and that was when I was doing my PhD. I was starting to notice these problems with productivity that would lead to some depressive episodes or like feelings of guilt and shame. And it wasn't just an imposter syndrome. I thought maybe this is imposter syndrome, but it wasn't that exactly, because I didn't feel like I was not capable or that I was not in the right place. It was just a feeling of inadequacy and ability to do my tasks. I went to a therapist, but the therapist concluded I have depression and social anxiety.
Did the therapist treat you for that? Or?
It was just a therapy, so talk. There was no medication involved, but I felt like it wasn't the right fit. We discussed productivity things, and we kept going to the same problems. Oh, let's schedule things. Let's schedule, and that somehow never worked because she never suspected it could be ADHD.
Interesting. So now are you taking medication, or what do you do for your ADHD?
I'm still experimenting because for me this is still fresh. I was taking medication regularly for a year, but I'm trying to, when I'm on holidays or when I don't have work, I try not to take it. I heard that some people can get a little bit addicted to it or that they need higher doses. I wanted to prevent that, so I have these breaks. But now I'm experimenting. If I feel that I'm in a bad place or a worse mood, then I take it. I'm still experimenting. I'm also trying to exercise, change my habits in a way that will converge to an overall healthy environment for my ADHD.
What have you found that helps the most?
One of the things is related to my art. I also have on my YouTube channel one, I talk about this comic journaling method that really helps me when I'm in a bad place or I'm procrastinating. I don't feel like doing something. Instead of just staying in my own mind, I make a comic about it. I make fun of the situation that I'm experiencing. Sometimes I share it on social media. That makes me feel productive because now I shared something and I created something new.
I did read that you're talking about treating ADHD with humor. So it sounds like maybe that's what you're talking about.
The talk is called Dealing with Adult ADHD Through Humor. So that's my method that I suggest people do whenever they're in ADHD paralysis or trying to do a task, but they just can't bring themselves to do it. That can help. It doesn't work maybe 100% of the time, but I think it can be effective in many situations.
Can you give a specific example of that?
In my talk, I show one particular comic that really opened my eyes as to how this method can be used as a weapon against procrastination. I was just scrolling on my phone, but I was hungry. I wanted to eat something. And I was thinking, oh, I have to make dinner, but I just couldn't get off my phone. I don't feel like making dinner. And I thought, this is so ridiculous. I spent an hour on my phone just watching videos or whatever. I could have made dinner 10 times in the span of 1 hour. I made a comic about that. Why everything takes longer when you have ADHD. 1 hour of procrastination, 10 minutes of preparing dinner because it will be some fast cooking, nothing special. And then 3 hours of recuperating from having done some tasks.
Identifying the ADHD and focusing on it was more helpful for you than your previous therapy.
Yes, definitely. Yes. One thing I forgot about this exercise was then after I made this comic, I shared it immediately on social media. I immediately went and made dinner for myself. I think you're right, definitely identifying it and taking away that guilt that comes with feeling unproductive. I think that's a big part of it for me, and that's what these comics do for me. It makes it disappear. Once the comic is there, once the humor is there, it makes it harmless.
It does sound so much healthier to laugh at yourself rather than flagellate yourself, right?
For me, the most clinical part of my presentation of ADHD is definitely these depressive episodes, but they're always triggered by the feelings of guilt after not having done something. So being able to cut that part of the process and not allowing the depression to come in is the most vital part.
You talk about being a really good student and sitting up in front in those early years. Was there anything that teachers could have noticed either then or in high school that would have led to an earlier diagnosis?
I definitely worked late, so I wouldn't do things immediately after coming home. Sometimes, especially in high school, I would study the night before. I would work on my assignments super late, but I would eventually complete them and it would be okay. But for a very good student, it was an unusual thing to do. I knew other good students and they didn't do those things. They would come home and do the homework immediately, or they would prepare several days in advance for an exam. I was definitely one of those students who got away with things. I often felt like, oh, I was the quirky nerd, or I was not really a nerd. That's how I always saw myself. I was very bad at the gym class. The physical education was my worst nightmare. And I could never catch the ball. I had terrible motoric skills. I read some studies, scientific studies that show that people with ADHD can have a worse perception of environment. I really struggled with that. I couldn't perceive where I am, like where the things are in relation to me. That is something that maybe is not so known, could potentially be a sign of ADHD or neurodivergence.
Do you wish that your teachers had helped you identify it earlier? Do you think your life would have been significantly different?
It might have, yes. I understand why it was missed, because I was a good student. There was no reason to look into something like that. But I would benefit definitely from more emotional support and more psychological support, and generally allowing for that space for students, even if it's just physical education, allowing students who are worse at something to take longer and to receive more support. I was sitting in the front and I followed what was happening in math class, but some other kid who was looking through the window, they never got that extra time they needed to acquire those skills. The thing for me in physical education, I needed extra time and extra lessons to learn those things. I think that's definitely the big failing of the school system for everyone.
How do you think your life would have been different if you'd been diagnosed at age 8?
It depends on how it would be treated, but if there was more support, allowing for longer times for students to acquire certain things, or even for me, if I was gifted in some way, if I was given more things that would allow me to learn more things that I liked, I think I would have more self-confidence. There are certain traumas or certain memories I have from physical education that always made me feel like there was something wrong with me. A teacher even saying, oh, do you have some problem? Or do you have some sickness? Or is there something wrong with your legs? Horrible things like that. I always felt like there was definitely something wrong with me. I'm not sick, but I'm sick. I knew that there was something there. I think those memories would not be there. I would have more self-confidence in certain areas of my life.
I've recently remembered being in kindergarten, and there was a big chart with stars for every kid who learned how to tie their shoes. I didn't get my star throughout the whole kindergarten class, and it's still a trauma. We've talked about work and we've talked about school. How has ADHD affected you in relationships?
That's also a very interesting one, because I've been married for 10 years now. I'm very focused. I might have also some autistic traits. I definitely love to have certain routines, but also like novelty. So it's a bit tricky. I like security in certain areas of my life. I definitely bonded when I found my husband. When we started dating, I was like, this is the perfect person to be with. And so I focused on him, and it has worked out. We're very compatible. So I haven't had problems.
Good for you. That's a big one. And with friends, socially, do you think it's ever been an impediment? You seem very outgoing.
There's a lot of people who have sort of best friends and this circle of friends. For me, that's very hard to maintain, because I can also get bored of people. I like to meet new people, but I always like to deep dive into very deep conversation with the people I meet. It's very hard for me to maintain like a very close relationship if it's not my romantic partner. So that's what I mean when I go all or nothing. I either spend all my attention on someone, so hyper focus, or just spice it up and go wherever I feel like it, go out with someone, but not have this feeling of that I owe something to someone, or that I have to show up and be there and be present. That's hard to focus.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end of our time. I'm wondering if there's advice that you would give to somebody your age. What is the most valuable thing you've learned on this journey of finding out that you had ADHD?
The most valuable thing is accepting that this creativity and free-mindedness that comes with ADHD is not something that should be stifled. For a long time, I thought that looking for novelty, being very creative, it comes at a cost of my productivity. And sometimes it does, but that's okay, because there's a lot of greatness that comes out of it. You can always find something that can lead to productivity. Like these comics that I've been creating, I always thought this is a waste of time. This is just a way to procrastinate. But then I realized, no, this is actually making me feel better. This is something I can present to the world, and it's productive. Things can be productive even if society doesn't see it that way at first. But you can convince them that it is worth putting it out there.
When you made that resolution to do more things that make you happy, besides doing these cartoons and I guess hanging out with your husband, what really makes you happy?
What really makes me happy? Connecting with people. That's why I write about myself and I share these things to relate to other people, especially relating through storytelling, through art. Creativity is a big part of that. It's like playing with my emotions, exploring them through art and exploring how other people feel about those things. Yeah, it's abstract. It's hard to put into words, but that's what makes me happy.
I have my own theory about why ADHD can be good for creativity, but what do you think the relationship is?
The fact that we have so many thoughts going on at once, it's a hyperactive mind that's constantly going through all the different possible worlds. Sometimes these different thoughts and different ideas converge and we come up with new scenarios of what can happen. I think that's creative.
This is great.
Maybe I can just say that if you're interested in my work, you can check out my website, Krajinovic.com. There you have all the information about my media, my writing, and my comics that I post every 2 weeks in my newsletter.
Anna, thank you very much. This has been such an interesting conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you're doing great work promoting inattentive ADHD.
This has been a production of Inattentive ADHD Coalition. Check us out at adhd.org and see how you can help us by donating or by spreading awareness about inattentive ADHD. Thank you.